On the 5th of June 2020, sisters Bibaa Henry and Nicole Smallman had arranged to meet with some friends at around 7 p.m. at Friant Country Park in Wembley in the northeast of London. The group met on the eastern side of the park near the stables, entering from Slough Lane. The day was a balmy, overcast day, but as it drew on, the clouds broke up and scattered and the humidity dropped, making the weather quite fine. The group of friends were completely unaware as they celebrated their lockdown, socially distanced party for Nicole's upcoming birthday that this was the last time any of them would see Bibaa and Nicole alive. Hi everyone, and welcome to Veritas True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse. A quick content warning: there is frequent explicit language and graphic description of murder and mutilation. As always, listener discretion is advised. I've decided to do this episode a little bit differently, just to break up you having to listen to my voice constantly. While researching this case, I found a multitude of various media and sound bites that will really get you into the nitty-gritty of this case. So I hope you'll enjoy. As always, feel free to let me know by visiting Veritas True Crime Podcast on Facebook. Drop me a friendly message if you'd like to. You can also find me on Twitter at Veritas Crime and on patreon.com/Veritas Crime. I also share photos, extra pieces that you don't hear in the show, and much more. So let's go. By 7 p.m, it was 14 degrees Celsius, around 57 degrees Fahrenheit outside. There was a light westerly breeze and scattered clouds. It would have been quite pleasant outside. The sun doesn't go down early in the summer in Europe, so it was still light when Nicole and Bibaa arrived at Friant Country Park. The weather stayed, in my opinion, pleasant throughout the evening, with temperatures dropping to around 11 degrees by 11 p.m. Personally, with that light westerly breeze, this would have been perfect. Bibaa Henry, a 46-year-old social worker in children's services, a job where she had found her passion, and had returned to education as a mature student, taking courses in social work to further her career in the field, previously worked with elderly Alzheimer's patients. Bibaa was a single mother to a daughter. She was highly valued and well-liked by her colleagues where she worked at the Buckinghamshire Council. Her family described her as being someone who was a passionate advocate for the safeguarding of vulnerable children and families. Nicole Smallman, a 27-year-old Westminster University graduate, was the youngest of three sisters. She worked as a freelance photographer and she'd been described as a joy to be around. Her family said that she was a joy from the moment that she entered this world. Her mother, Mina Smallman, recalling the story of Nicole's birth, Nikki as she called her, was born by caesarean section, and her husband Chris had been the first to hold her. He was completely smitten with her. Nikki grew up to be a daddy's girl, said Mina. Nicole loved people, had an enormous amount of friends, and was a real social butterfly. She was a wonderful singer, and Mina said she could sing anything, recounting that she and Nicole would often sing together in the worship group at church. She said singing was effortless for Nikki. Nikki was the only child of her father, Chris Smallman. Have a listen to Mina Smallman, she's the mother of Nicole and Bibaa, talking to James O'Brien from LBC, that's Leading Britain's Conversation, about her daughters. This recording is from December 8th, 2021.
Well, Bibaa was a senior social worker, a single mum, and she loved her job. And she would have been on the phone to me talking about the little lad who just died. And she always said, not on her watch. You know, you couldn't be covering up anything on her watch. And she was fiery like me. So, you know, my DNA. Pocket rocket, she really was, you know. And she was never leave the house with a hair out of place. She was eBay queen. She would get loads of designer stuff and, you know, everything was cheap. You know, she wouldn't waste money. She was thrilled. She bought her new car with savings, so she got herself an Audi, and she was really pleased with that. And she was a determined woman to make something of herself. Now, Nicole, she was the reverse of Bibaa. She couldn't give a damn what she looked like. In fact, one of the pictures of her in the picnic, she actually has a hole in her sock. So if you look carefully, and she would turn up, and we'd get dressed for dinner, and she'd always have holes in her tights, and I'd say, "Oh, Nick, come on, go, come on." And she said, "Mum, it doesn't matter, who cares?" And I always had a batch of tights. So we got to the point, she'd say, "Mum, have you got the tights?"
Never stop being mum.
Yeah. Hippie. She should have been born in the late 60s, 70s. She'd
Right.
have looked great at Woodstock. And she was more quiet, reserved. But if you got her on her topics, she would fire up, So she had the DNA.
There were around 10 people who attended the gathering in Friant Country Park. After looking at the Google Maps and Google Earth images, it was actually a lovely spot for them to have met. The place where they'd gathered is known locally to be a good spot to sit and look out over London. One of Bibaa's close friends, Nina Esmat, was the first of the friends to join them in the park, and she said that it was a beautiful evening, amazing view, amazing sunset. We were all taking pictures remarking at the sky at night. It is well documented on Facebook and through all of the reports that followed from the two women going missing that the group of friends enjoyed their celebration picnic, and as the evening drew on, the group dispersed. Nina had left by 11:45 p.m. She said during the trial that when she left, she didn't think that the sisters would stay too much longer, and she recalled that it felt like a safe place. By midnight, Bibaa and Nicole were the only ones remaining from their group in the park. There were a number of photos of Bibaa and Nicole dancing and having fun with fairy lights draped over them. At 1:05 a.m, Nicole sent a text message to her boyfriend, Adam Stone. It read, "I'm dancing in a field." This would be the last text message that anyone would ever receive from her. The pair had set up a camera and were using a clicker to take photos of themselves dancing around with the fairy lights. They took around 100 photos as they listened to music, danced and enjoyed themselves in what could only be described as being in good spirits. This continued until around 1:13 a.m, and the last ever photo on the phone shows the girls looking over to their left. Detectives on the case believed that this was the moment that they had spotted and were attacked by Danyal Hussein. They say that he had been lying in wait for around 4 hours, waiting to make his move. Although Adam replied to Nicole, she didn't respond, and naturally he says that he became increasingly worried. Calls to Nicole at 2:30 a.m. went unanswered. Adam had made the decision to stay home that night. He did say that he gave Nicole money for a cab to get herself safely home. None of her friends nor her family had seen or heard from her since he had received that text message. He started reaching out to friends and family to try and track her down and make sure that she had made it home safely. When it became clear that her whereabouts were unknown by anyone that she knew, Adam reported Nicole missing to the police. The family also reached out to people who were known to have been at the party with them, but no one had seen or heard from them. Adam even tried to track Nicole's phone location, but without any success. That night in June 2020, Danyal Hussein decided their fate and he took their lives right there in the park. Nicole and Bibaa were found brutally murdered on the 7th of June 2020. Both women had died from multiple stab wounds. Bibaa was likely the first to die. Hussein took her by surprise and quickly overpowered her. She suffered 8 stab wounds and did not exhibit any signs that she had tried to fight off her assailant. She was stabbed with such force that the knife penetrated 15 centimeters into her chest, which resulted in death due to the injury to her left lung and her heart. Nicole was likely next to die. She had received 40 or more stab wounds and knife incisions on her body. The court documents say that she had 40, but the media reported that she had 28, so let's go with 40. There were wounds on her right hand and her left arm. This showed that she likely tried to fight off Danyal Hussein. Even after she had fallen to the ground, Hussein continued to attack her like a wild animal. Sadly, she could not save herself or her sister. Mina told the news that when they were doing the forensics on Nicole, investigators had found a piece of silver birch in the palm of her hand. Nicole was wearing a brown jacket. During the frenzied attack, Danyal cut his right hand with the knife, so badly that he sought medical assistance in the days following the murders. He was seen on CCTV at the medical center, but during questioning and during his trial, he refused to admit that it was even him, but it was undeniably so. Bibaa and Nicole were dragged by their feet along the ground to the place where Danyal decided to dump them, 75 meters away from where he had murdered them. The area was around 5 meters deep. There were trees running on either side of where he had hid them, and there was a path which intersected the area. The girls' bodies were not readily visible, but they could have been made out. Despite this, no one noticed them. 2 whole days they laid there. He made no attempt to bury them. Instead, he positioned their lifeless bodies top to toe in an embrace with each other, a staged scene to defile them in death. He was doing this in order to conceal his crime. Their eyes were open, dull, and blank, the stab wounds visible on their bodies. Bibaa was wearing black leggings and black and white sneakers. Her upper clothing was pulled up, covering her head to expose her stomach. She had obvious friction burns to her upper back. And Nicole, who was wearing the brown jacket, also had her upper clothing pushed up to reveal her midriff and multiple stab wounds. The post-mortem report stated that their backs were covered in abrasions from being dragged quite some distance from where they had been murdered. Both Nicole and Bibaa's phones were stolen. Data retrieved from the devices after they had been recovered in the pond next to where they had had their picnic showed that the killer had tried to access the phones whilst walking around the park trying to unlock them. It's unclear what he was actually trying to do with them, but he was unsuccessful. When he couldn't unlock them, he then tried to conceal the evidence by throwing them in the pond nearby with other items of Nicole and Bibaa's. This was all an attempt to conceal his crime. It's also likely that that's when he left the park via the Valley Drive entrance. Showing his sheer arrogance, he left behind massive amounts of evidence, DNA, and his latex gloves. 2 days after Nicole and Bibaa did not come home, Adam, along with his family and separately Nina Esmat, made their way to Friant Country Park to search for the women. They met on the hill where the party had been. Nina, during the trial, said that it looked like they had just packed everything up and left. Frustrated by the lack of urgency shown by the police to this point, Nina said that she had a strange feeling something terrible had happened. During the search of the park, Nina found Bibaa's sunglasses glinting in the sun, and that was when her heart sank. Finding Bibaa's prescription glasses and seeing that they were a little mangled concerned Nina because she knew that Bibaa would never have left them behind. She called the Wembley police to tell them what she had found, and she was told to take them to a local police station. Basically, a big fob-off. As a side note, I can understand why the family and friends of Bibaa and Nicole were pissed off about the way that this case was handled. Just months later, in March of 2021, Sarah Everard was murdered in a similar manner, except the murderer was a police officer, but also in London. The outpouring of grief and public outrage was overwhelming. And this is not trying to take away from Sarah's family and what they went through, but where was the outpouring in the grief and anger at the bastard who took Nicole and Bibaa's lives, depriving their family of their daughter, sister, friends, mother? They were killed and the world barely bat an eyelid. The one and only thing that I will say about this, politically speaking, This came down to